In 1900, Louisville, Kentucky, had the highest tuberculosis death rate in America. Built on low swampland, the area was the perfect breeding ground for disease, and in 1910, a hospital was constructed on a windswept hill in southern Jefferson County that had been designed to combat the horrific disease. The disease continued to run rampant through the region, and eventually, with donations of money and land, a new hospital was started in 1924. The new structure, known as Waverly Hills Sanitorium, opened 2 years later in 1926. It was considered the most advanced tuberculosis sanatorium in the country, but even then, most of the patients succumbed to the disease. There was no medicine available at that time to treat the disease, and so many patients were offered rest, fresh air, and lots of nutritious food. Sadly, the main use for the hospital was to isolate those who had come down with the disease and to keep them away from those who had not. Families were tragically divided, with parents and even children forced into the sanatorium with little contact with their loved ones.
Let's have a look at one of these sanatoria, or tuberculosis hospitals as they're called today. Real hospitals for the tuberculous, and not merely resting places. Here we are in a large southern sanatorium. This one has beds for 500 patients. Altogether, there are now 90,000 such beds available. Rest and more rest, as Trudeau discovered when he himself took the cure as a young doctor. Yes, and good food. Nowadays, doctors don't stuff patients with more milk and eggs than they can digest. Just good, well-balanced meals, enough to gain weight on. Smell those delicious loaves. New ways of resting the lung have been developed. This patient is getting pneumothorax treatment. Air is let into the chest cavity, and that rests the lung so that it can heal. When the diseased lung is fully healed, it is allowed to expand again. A lifesaver for many. Each patient is helped to find his place in the workaday world when he leaves the sanatorium. Here's a class in typewriting. In this sanatorium, as in many others, children of tuberculous parents who cannot be properly protected otherwise are cared for in a special department of the sanatorium.
Treatments for tuberculosis are sometimes as bad as the disease itself. Some of the experiments that were conducted in search of a cure seem barbaric by today's standards, but others are now a common practice. Patients' lungs were exposed to ultraviolet light to try and stop the spread of bacteria. This was done in sunrooms, using artificial light in place of sunlight, or on the roof or open porches of the hospital. Since fresh air was thought to also be a possible cure, patients were often placed in front of huge windows or on the open porches, no matter what the season. Old pictures show patients lounging in chairs, taking in the fresh air, while literally covered with snow. Treatments were less pleasant and much bloodier. Balloons would be surgically implanted in the lungs and then filled with air to expand them. Needless to say, this often had disastrous results, as did an operation where muscles and ribs were removed from a patient's chest to allow the lungs to expand further and let in more oxygen. This blood-soaked procedure was seen as a last resort, and many patients did not survive. While patients who did survive both the disease and the treatments left Waverly Hills through the front door. Many others left through what came to be known as the body chute. This enclosed tunnel for the dead led from the hospital to the railroad tracks at the bottom of the hill. Using a motorized rail and cable system, Bodies were lowered in secret to the waiting trains. This was done so that patients would not see how many were actually leaving the hospital as corpses. Their mental health, the doctors believed, was just as important as their physical health. By the late 1930s, TB had begun to decline around the world, and by 1943, new medicines had largely eradicated it in the United States. A small jump in new cases did occur after World War II, and many soldiers returning from war were housed at Waverly Hills. Dr. Stewart noted in his autobiography that many of the soldiers had cases that were so advanced they did not live for more than a week after arriving at the hospital. In 1961, Waverly Hills was closed down, but was reopened a year later as Woodhaven Geriatric Sanitorium. There have been many rumors and stories told about patient mistreatment and unusual experiments during these years that the building was used as an old age home. Some of them have been proven to be false, but others have, unfortunately, turned out to be true. Electroshock therapy, which was considered to be highly effective in those days, was widely used for a variety of ailments. Budget cuts in the 1960s and 70s led to both horrible conditions and patient mistreatments, and in 1982, the state closed the facility for good. Is it any wonder, after all of the death, pain, and agony within these walls, that Waverly Hills is considered to be one of the most haunted places in the world?